Welcome to Put the Metal On. My name is Dave Cullen, and today we're here for another review. Today we're going to be talking about the new album Prophet Ilja, the latest offering from Polish black metal band Patriarkh that was released just gone on January 3rd. So before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of the record itself, let's talk about the bands coming up to this record. So it's probably very well known at this point that before the recording of Prophet Ilja, that Patriarkh, of course, went through a lot of significant changes. Obviously, originally known as Batushka, they were recently involved in a legal dispute over the rights to the name. As recently as May 2024, a Polish court did rule in favor of previous member Krzysztof Drabakowski, and this prompted that band leader, Bartholomew Kuziak, prompted to rename the band as recently as September of 2024. Now, despite all this, the band has still been very active. They've still been releasing music between 2019 to 2024. And in this time, they've released a full-length album, 2 EPs, and some live compilations as well. As well as that, they've still been touring excessively in North America, Asia, and Europe. I was very fortunate to see them in Dublin back in October, November of last year. Now, because of all this, there's a lot of people that are saying that because of all the legal issues, because of all the toll that has happened within the band, there's some that are saying that it creates not just a struggle in identity, but a struggle in innovation in the band's creative outputs. Some are saying that the releases are marked with a pretty much already established formula, and there's sort of a lack of risk-taking, certainly in terms of pushing their black metal and folk elements together. And so because of that, you could see that perhaps they're not just trying to genuinely create expressions of artistry, they're essentially trying to stay relevant. I can see their point of view. I mean, I do love their sound, but at the same time, what's different from a few years ago? You certainly see a band like that with all the potential in the world to be one of the great black metal bands, and it's like they're sticking to their laurels maybe too much. Nevertheless, Prophet Ilja proves to be an ambitious project that not only merges their black metal, but also their folk and historic themes as well. Certainly, this particular record is based on the concept behind the true story of Eliasz Klimowicz, who was an illiterate peasant from a small village in Poland during the 1930s and 40s. All 8 tracks are called Wierszalin, followed by a numeral, which basically reflects on the theatrical focus of the historical narrative of the album. So there's a lot to live up with this particular record, so let's get to it. We're going to break it down in 6 different sections. Starting with number 1, overall composition and cohesion. Now, while the record has a very solid thematic foundation, one can see that it feels like the pace is a little inconsistent. I mean, there's some track transitions that flow very nicely, very simple, but there's others that feel, particularly with the longer atmospheric sections, that it feels like it disrupts the energy rather than maintains it. And while the record maintains an incredibly solid black metal foundation, it feels like the folk elements that are brought in purposely to separate this record from anything else feel like it's more tacked on. And I mean that in the sense that, sure, it does provide variety in the inclusion of the folk elements. It doesn't feel very inspiring. And therefore, it doesn't feel like enhancements per se. It feels like more, I hate to say this, but a distraction. Now, the use of interludes is very good, and all the intros with their prayers in between the songs. Anything I feel that enhances the storytelling aspect of what they're trying to say. But when you try to do something like that as well, I feel like there's a lack of fluidity as a result of it. Certainly, the shifts between intensity and atmosphere, they feel very jarring. The duration of the album is fine, it's perfectly reasonable, but there's also some sections of it that I just feel a little dragged out. Like there's 1 or 2 songs that I just feel they overstay its welcome just a little bit, and I feel if it was a little tighter, it could have had a bit more of an impact. We'll next move on to the songwriting and engagement of the record. Overall, the album creates a very haunting mood between both its melodies and the interplay between black metal and folk, for the most part. But in a way, as a consequence of that, there isn't really any standout moments. I can't recall a particularly memorable hook from any of the songs. For the most part, while the melodies are really good, they seem to blend together, and therefore nothing really stands out for me. I feel like the songwriting is trying to deliver a more of a dynamic structure, which I can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to balance complexity with accessibility. Trouble is, when you're trying to do something like that, it's very easy for tracks to lose direction, which I feel was the case in this situation, and as a result, they're over relying on the atmosphere of the tracks. And while I admire them for trying to be less predictable, I just don't feel it works on this occasion. The album aims for a very dark and epic atmosphere, which may intrigue listeners who are into their history, into their spiritual types of themes. But unfortunately, there is that lack of intensity. It really is a struggle, I imagine, for most listeners to fully absorb on that. Unless you're into the themes like that, I'm not sure it's going to have too much impact on people who listen. But I don't know. Certainly, I feel personally any emotional impact gets diluted because of perhaps the songwriting choices. Next part, the performance and musicianship of the album. I shouldn't even need to tell you, they're very tight and they're very precise. But at the same time, they're not exceptional. And while the guitar work more than anything does stand out, it does lean more so than anything else on only black metal tropes. The drumming, I feel, is the biggest shame. It doesn't really stand out or elevate the composition. There needs to be more dynamic shifts in there for me. What I like about the musicianship is that it feels very organic. It feels like they're not letting technical prowess be overshadowed by the emotional expression of the actual playing of the instruments. The trouble is, it also feels held back. I feel if the playing was a bit more expressive, it would come across as way more dynamic and way more intriguing. The vocals I really enjoyed, like from traditional black metal chants to the choral chants, and they do add depth to the overall narrative of the records. At the same time, it doesn't really stand out to anything else I've heard in black metal before. And the biggest shame about this records is the choral chants I feel are horribly underutilized. I feel they miss a huge opportunity here by using that more, which could have been brilliant for overall dynamic effect of the records. Just to finish off by the bass, it showed strong symphony, but I could barely hear it. It was almost non-existent in the mix, and that is one of my pet peeves. If I can't hear the bass, like you might as well be missing one person in the band. That's how I feel. Next point, production and sound quality. I mean, the production quality is fantastic. Everything, for the most part, is very clear, but it's almost too clear. I feel if the sound was a bit more organic or raw, it could have added more character for what they were trying to achieve with the theme. I mean, the tones for the record are very appropriate for the genre. It adds very clear and heavy sound, but it just lacks that richness which I think is needed for the riffs. The drums, for the most part, sound very loud, very powerful, but again, lack that energy. The vocals, for the most part, sit very well in the mix, not too loud, not too buried underneath. At the same time, because of that, because it's right in the middle, it doesn't command too much attention. And something like that, certainly if it had a more dominant presence, with addition with the choral effects, it just, again, brings everything down more than it should. The atmospheric effects, for the most part, are, again, used effectively in some places, but it doesn't feel fresh. It feels like I've heard it before, and maybe it's because I've heard it from them before, but I don't know, there's nothing brand new about it. Point 5, the creativity and originality of the records. This, for me, is the biggest shame of this record. While it is a very unique concept, I feel the execution doesn't do it justice. In other words, it doesn't differentiate itself from other black metal acts, which I feel is a missed opportunity. And while it draws from its previous times, particularly under the Patriarkh name, it doesn't bring anything new for me. I feel for the most part that it's sort of a lesser version of what it could have been rather than something that was distinctly its own. And certainly because they're breaking into this, what I would have hoped, a new avenue in the back of all their legal disputes, it could have given them that chance to break out. And I feel this was missing in this case. So while it does attempt by pushing the boundaries of black metal, I feel it just dabbles at the idea rather than fully exploring it, which is such a shame. And this brings us to the last point of this record, the replay value and impact of this record. As I mentioned too, it's a very interesting record. I did enjoy listening to it, but I won't be pushed to listen to it too much after that, because it doesn't stand out enough to me. For me, the third and fourth track are the standout tracks, because that gives hints of greatness. So that's why I do believe there still is potential with Patriarkh in the future. But overall, it lacks that strong consistency. So it has glimpses, but it it doesn't have like the entire package just yet. So to conclude, Project Ilja is a very strong record. It does try to combine black metal with folk and atmospheric efforts while telling a story. But at the same time, I just feel it fails to capitalize on the opportunity that they could have had here for the records. There's not enough standout moments. They're, for the most part, restrained in how they're playing. And I feel like the folk elements are underdeveloped. Therefore, it's a missed opportunity. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure all atmospheric black album listeners will be perfectly happy with records. I, for one, think it's fine and will still listen to it. But it doesn't do enough to leave a lasting impression, so I can't see myself listening to it too often. And that's the review, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. This is the first review I've done on this channel with the intention of doing many more in the future. Please stay tuned. We're going to be doing more over the next week with other records that came out in the last couple of months. If you liked this video, please give it a like. And if it's your first time and you'd like to get in contact with more videos with us, please give us a subscribe. We'll be back very soon with some more records reviews very soon. But until then, I've been Dave Cullen. This has been Put the Metal On. Stay safe. Enjoy the metal.